Hey guys, so here today we're going to start looking, and this is really section 5 of our quadratics unit. We're going to start looking at solving quadratics. We're going to spend a bunch of time with factoring, which is something that you may have in there a little bit and maybe not. So we're going to spend a bunch of time factoring our quadratics, okay? So this is really our first part of that. So remember back to our last lesson, we talked about finding solutions was one of our words, but it had 3 other buddies, right? As you can see here, roots, zeros, and x-intercepts. So most of the time, a lot of times we can find a way to factor our quadratics to find those solutions, right? Because that's our easiest way that we can set y equal to 0. Okay, so here's our steps that we're going to do. First thing I have to do is I set the quadratic equal to 0. Really, the first thing I have to do is make sure I only have y on one side, right? So get everything else to the other side, because we talked last section, our last lesson, of when that parabola crosses my x-axis, my y value is 0, because I've gone over, but I've never gone up or down. Okay, so it's where those equal to 0. So that's why I have to get y by itself. So once I set it equal to 0, I factor that side. Okay, so here's how I factor, and this does not explain it very well, and there's not a great way for me to write. Give me just a second. Hold on. Okay, I moved a couple things around, so now I can actually walk you through these problems, which I feel like will be way more useful. Okay, so here we go. So now I've got this x squared plus 3x minus 10. So to factor this, we are going to be taking this last key, this c value, remember, because we've got ax squared plus bx plus c is how we have our standard form quadratic. So I take my c value, and this is only if this is a 1 right in front, which for now it is, okay? So I find all of my factor pairs of this negative 10. So what are ways I could multiply things together to get negative 10? Well, I could have negative 1 times a positive 10, or 1 times a negative 10. 2 also works, so I could have 2 negative 5, or there we go. And those are the only ways I can multiply to get negative 10. So then when I add them together, I would get 9, negative 9, 3, and negative 3. Because this, my b value is a positive 3, that's the one I want to deal with. So I'm going to be having this right here. Okay, so now I can rewrite my equation, my quadratic, is I've got x, and that doesn't change. Those x's are there. So then I've got minus 2 and plus 5. Okay, so I've just rewritten this. I haven't actually solved it yet. I've just rewritten my quadratic. Okay, so now the next step is I want you to know the words or the term, the zero product property. Move this down here. Okay, so the zero product property tells me that if I am having anything equal to 0, one or both of these could be equal to 0. Right? Just think about that. If I'm multiplying some things and I get 0, I know that at least one of them is 0. So because of that zero product property, that tells me I can take each piece that I'm multiplying here and set it equal to 0. So now I have x minus 2 equals 0. So I would just add 2 to both sides. So x equals 2. And I've got x plus 5 equals 0. And I subtract 5. So x equals negative 5. Okay, so what I could do is I could go ahead and use Desmos to double check my work. We're not going to be using Desmos here as our main source of solving, because we have to know how to factor. This is one of those key skills that, yes, you must have before you leave my class. Okay, so we're going to really work on that. So let's walk through another one together. Okay, let's look at this number 1. So I see here that we've got x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So already that first step has been done for us. So really everything's over to one side, and I have set my equation equal to 0. So from there, I can go ahead and do what else I need to do. So I'm going to take this c value. I don't know why my pen is being mad. So I'm going to take this c value, which is plus 3, and find out all of the factors that I have of 3. Well, there's really only one. I can only multiply 1 times 3. And when I add them, luckily enough, they equal 4. So now I can rewrite my equation. So I've got x plus 1 and x plus 3 equals 0. Using that zero product property tells me that each piece can be set equal to 0. So I've got x plus 1 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. Now to solve both of those, I would subtract 1 from each side, so x equals -1, and I subtract 3 from each side, so x equals a -3. So those right there would be my 2 solutions to this quadratic. And again, I could put this into Desmos and double check. So let's keep going. So there's a bunch more for you to try. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave this here for a second and pause the video so you can double check your work once you've done it. And really there's a bunch more. So there's some down here now that you see are not written in standard form, right? And I told you that that is going to always be our first step, is to get this in standard form. So let's look here at number 20 together. Let me just, whoop, that went the wrong way, but that's okay, we'll go up here. So for number 20, I see I've got x squared minus 10x plus 49 equals 4x plus 1. So first thing is, not everything's already to one side, so let's go ahead and do that first. So I see I have to subtract this 4x. Generally, when we're doing this, okay, to make your life easy and to make it doable, you want this value in front of your x squared term to be positive, okay? So move everything to whatever side would keep that being positive. Okay, so I'm going to subtract that 4x, so now I've got x squared minus 14x plus 49 equals 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract that 1. So I've got x squared minus 14x plus 48 equals 0. Sweet, now I'm there. I've gotten everything to one side and I'm set equal to 0. So now I can take that c value and figure out, okay, what are all of the possible ways that I can get 48? I always start at 1. Well, I know 1 times 48. 2 I definitely know works, 24. 3 actually works too. 3 goes into 48 16 times. 4 works 12 times. 5 doesn't work. 6 times 8 is 48. 7 doesn't work. So I know I've got all of the possibilities. So then when I add them, I've got 49, and I've got 26, and I've got 19, and I've got 16, and I've got 14. Okay, so according to this b value, I needed a -14. Well, this was a +14. So what I also know is that a positive times a positive will give me a positive, but also a negative times a negative will still give me that positive 48 value. But when I add them, it'll make it negative. Okay, so that's one way you can always just kind of double check yourself and be on. So now I can rewrite it. So I've got x minus 6 and I've got x minus 8. So now I set each piece equal to 0. So x minus 6 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. So x equals 6 and x equals 8. So those would be my 2 solutions. Okay, so it is still a very doable thing to factor it, even if it's not written in standard form to start with. Okay. So let's look at number 21. So because 21 looks a lot different as well, and this might throw you off even though we're doing the same thing. So I've got 11x squared equals x squared plus 8x. Right? Things are not all on the same side, so that's going to be my first step. So I'm going to subtract my x squared and I'm going to subtract my 8x. So I end up with 10x squared minus 8x equals 0. Ew, this is not a really pretty number, right? It's not a 1. It's going to make it more difficult to factor. Okay, so the thing I'm going to do first is I'm going to say, is there something I can factor out of each piece? Well, I see that both my numbers are divisible by 2 and both of my terms have an x value. Okay, so I can go ahead and factor out, I know that everything is divisible by 2 and I know I can factor out that x. So when I divide that out, I'm left here with 5x minus 4 equals 0. Well, now I'm at a place where I could set each of these pieces equal to 0. and actually be able to solve them. So I factored them, and I know I factored them because I'm multiplying a couple of things together. So now I can go ahead and set each piece equal to 0. So 2x equals 0, and then 5x minus 4 equals 0. So I've got 0, and then I add 4, so 5x equals 4, and then we'll work over here, divide by 5, so x equals 4/5. So my two solutions are x equals 4/5 and x equals 0. Okay, so these are getting a little bit more complicated, and we will spend, I want you to ignore 22 for now. That's not what we're really going to be looking at, so I want you to ignore it for now. That's a special one that we'll deal with later. Okay, so now it is time for you to go work on your homework number 5. Just kind of these simple factorings. If you get to one that looks kind of like this number 22, where I haven't taught you how to factor something out or to pull them into pieces, you can try it if you want, but we're not there yet. We will be soon. Okay, so go ahead and you can pause this video at any point to kind of see all of these examples done, but make sure you're trying them first. Use these as a double check and not as like your main source, right? Because we always want to try things first. So now you're going to work on your homework number 5, and when you get stuck, just let me know. Thanks, guys.